Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes, and here are 5 big stories. We have a lot to discuss. Let's get right to it. Ukraine's Zelenskyy discusses peace prisoners with senior Vatican official. This is the senior, number 2 in charge of the Vatican, just below Pope Francis. He visited 4 cities in Ukraine and talked about what can be done this year to bring closer a just peace for Ukraine. I like that I'm hearing just peace, not just peace. It's very important for us and for the cause of peace that the Vatican is active in protecting life, helping us implement the peace formula, especially regarding the release of prisoners. And not just prisoners, but also a papal envoy has visited Kyiv and Moscow as part of efforts to bring home Ukraine's children. Authorities have been deported to Russia. Now, that's a big problem. The Russians deliberately took Ukraine's children out in groups. This was in Human Rights in Ukraine just a couple days ago. I'm going to do a whole video just about the deportation and re-education of children in Russia. So, unfortunately, no one was prepared for what happened on 24 February 2022. We began to receive reports of children getting lost during the evacuation process, which was not appropriately organized, and everyone tried to escape the best that they could. In some cases, to save their children, parents gave them not even the relatives, but, for example, the neighbors. In some instances were terrible when shelling or occupations, parents were killed and children were taken away. Now, when the Kyiv region was liberated, we already had testimonies about the search for children who had disappeared, for example, in Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel. I think the whole of Ukraine and the whole world know what happened to the people who remained there under occupation. A lot of civilians were killed, but after liberation, when criminologists went there, when the Ukrainian police gained access to those places, it turned out that children weren't there. Fortunately, there were no bodies of the missing children, but there were no children themselves. There were statements that the children were there at the time of the occupation. Therefore, continuing our search for the first time, probably April, May 2022, we learned that children could be purposefully taken away. At that moment, it was impossible to imagine that anyone would think of taking children from their parents or their relatives and moving them to the territory of the aggressor state. But that's what happened. Again, I'm going to do an entire video on this. Just keep your eyes out for it. Okay, big story number 2. Mark Kelly is now a heavy favorite to be Harris's running mate as he blasts J.D. Vance on Ukraine. Okay, and he's got some props about, involvement with Ukraine. He's an astronaut. He's has some pretty high stature. In fact, for my money, he's got better stature than Kamala for the sake of actually winning. Now, I think the Democrat Party is just going to coronate Kamala and get on with it and move forward. I think it's a mistake. I think she would be stronger if there was a real contest in the convention and she emerged from that contest as the clear favorite. That would make her stronger. I think Kelly would be the better candidate, and I think he would likely emerge from the contest. But I don't think he's running, or the Democrats are going to allow that to happen. And so he might be a number 2. Now, his props as a good supporter of Ukraine will work with the left, no problem. It could work with the center. It won't work with the right, but they're not trying to attract much of the right. But yeah, I don't think I think his moderate credentials are going to help Kamala more than his pro-Ukraine credentials, but it's comforting to know that he is very pro-Ukraine, because I think Kamala is, but it's not really proven in any meaningful way yet. I'm giving Kamala the benefit of the doubt and assuming that she already is, and this would just bolster it. Okay, that's enough of that particular story. Big story number 3, grinding assault. So Putin will throw up to 2 million troops into a meat grinder over the next 5 years just to seize Ukraine, says the UK defense chief. And we look at this story in the Euromaidan press. Capturing 4 Ukrainian regions could cost 1.8 million troops, according to the new head of the British military. His name is General Rolly Walker. I talked about him just the other day. The new chief of British Army has estimated that Russia could suffer up to 1.8 million casualties over 5 years in its attempt to capture 4 major Ukrainian regions: Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Oblast. It claims to have annexed in fall of 2022. Okay, now, that's assuming the war actually can go for 5 years, right? I mean, I don't know that it actually can. I think either Russia will break down economically or Ukraine will break down by not having enough men to mobilize. One of those two factors is those are the two factors that I see in competition with each other to go that distance. Walker, a former SAS officer and director of special forces, assumed his role as UK chief of the General Staff on 15 June. Speaking at the 2024 Land Warfare Conference, Walker based his prediction on the current rate of attrition of dead and wounded faced by Russia's forces in Ukraine. So he's not just pulling this out of thin air, he's actually making a case based on what has already happened so far. He finished by saying, "It doesn't matter how it ends. I think Russia will emerge from it probably weaker objectively or absolutely, but still very, very dangerous and wanting some form of retribution for what we have done to help Ukraine." And then he stated that Britain must be prepared for war within 3 years. So the Russians don't stop unless they are stopped. And unless they're stopped in a huge and meaningful way, and I don't mean come to the negotiation table and make some paper barrier, right? I don't mean that. I mean defeated in a real meaningful sense, like Germany or Japan was after World War II. They're not going to learn a lesson, and they will be back. Okay. Former Trump NSC official explains his vision for ending the war in Ukraine, and it's befuddling to me. So this is a general who is part of Trump's national security team, and they write that Ukraine will not be asked to give up its ambition to regain all land seized by Russia, but Kyiv should agree to use diplomatic means only and realize that it might take a long time to regain all the territories. What? I mean, you know you're dealing with Russia, right? Like, and Russia's not going to stop. And Russia, according to the British general that just took over, he said that Russia's not going to stop and they're still going to be a threat, and we have to be prepared for war in 3 years just in case. Okay. The strategy proposes to use the partial lifting of sanctions on Russia to encourage the Kremlin to take steps toward peace and establish the levies on Russian energy imports to fund Ukraine's reconstruction. I don't know that this makes any sense. Like, to a Russian would probably laugh at that. I mean, it's just, it doesn't make, yeah, I just can't see how General Kellogg thinks that this is a good idea. Okay, so last little bit, EU refuses to support Hungary and Slovakia in transit of Lukoil through Ukraine. So what happened here is that Lukoil, a Russian oil company, was pumping Russian oil through existing pipelines that went through Ukraine to Hungary and to Slovakia. Now, Hungary and Slovakia are upset because this Lukoil was just sanctioned, and so essentially the pipeline's turned off for all intents and purposes to these countries, and now they're upset because they have to buy more expensive oil elsewhere. And so they're appealing to the EU Trade Commission to say, hey, that's not fair, that they get to sanction Russia. Like, are you not aware that the entire bloc is putting massive sanctions on Russia? I just don't understand how they could be missing this. I said that was the last story. There's one more. Breaking: FBI Director Director Wray has just stated that Russian bots are working on social media to sell narratives about Ukraine using artificial intelligence. Quote, a Russian government-linked generative AI social media bot farm where they are posing as, among others, U.S. persons and trying to sell various narratives, and in that case very heavily focused on the war in Ukraine and trying to get everybody turned against each other. Now, that last line's really interesting because this has been the playbook for Russia for some time. If you go back to the Mueller report, they'll say Mueller's report said, like, they'll impersonate like a Black Lives Matter kind of group and white national, white supremacist kind of things, so that Americans are turned at each other. That's the playbook, and they're still doing it. But now they're amplifying the Ukraine narrative, which I find really, really interesting. Okay, last little bit. I saw this. Jay in Kyiv. Concern grows as it's now feared that the crew of this Russian armored vehicle may have been injured. Now, I'm not showing the video, but okay, yeah, I would think that would probably be a fair concern. Okay, that's all, my friends. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.